If you run your own business or you're overseeing a department in a larger company, there's a real good chance that you're dealing with conflict in your workplace. Now the question you have to ask yourself is, are you confident and are you certain about dealing with conflict and getting a good resolution out of it? If you're not alone. So stay tuned, because I'm going to help you deal with conflict in the workplace. One of the reasons to get really good at helping resolve conflicts in your workplace is because it makes you a much more effective manager and leader. And by being a much more effective manager and leader, you're going to establish greater trust with your people. You're going to be respected more by those that work for you as well as those you work with. You're going to have a much better ability of an authority level to be able to get things done, and it's going to give you a greater level of confidence to be able to oversee the organization you're responsible for. Okay, the first thing that's important to understand is what conflict actually is, because conflict is a little different than your run-of-the-mill problem solving. Conflict is when you have a serious disagreement between two or more people, and where they're trying to hold on to a particular position, or they're trying to protect what they perceive as something that they might lose. So as an example, if you have somebody that is really feeling strongly about something and they perceive that by losing the argument or losing the decision, they're going to lose face within their organization, that's an area of conflict. Now, in every conflict, you've got two basic components. You've got the actual issue, which is the problem that needs to be resolved, and then you've got all the emotion that's built up around that issue. What most people that aren't comfortable or confident dealing with conflict tend to focus on first is the emotion. That's usually where the problem starts. One of the reasons I've found with many of my clients, the reason that they don't like dealing with conflict is a number of things. Most of them all deal with fear. There's a fear of loss, a fear of the problem escalating, a fear of damaging the relationships of the people that are involved in the conflict. There's a fear of being perceived as ineffective. You know, if you're running the business or you're overseeing the department and you can't resolve the conflicts amongst the people on your team, there's a real fear of being perceived as not really that good. And then finally, there's a fear of actually getting more of the same kind of conflict coming back. If you're not willing to address a conflict, or you don't feel like you're doing it well and that's causing you to avoid the conflict situation, here's some of the consequences you're going to run into. First, you're going to end up with diminished cooperation amongst your team members. That's going to lead to loss of productivity, which is going to lead to escalating misdeeds from people who have found ways to add conflict into the situation. Finally, you're going to have a loss of trust amongst most of the people that you're working with, and eventually you could lose really good employees. Now, there's three things that I've found that are at the root of most conflicts that arise in the workplace. One is poor communications. You know, the communications that are going on now aren't clear, they're not consistent, people are getting mixed messages. The second one is emotionally based decision making. This is where people are kind of questioning the reasons why decisions are getting made because they're seeing a lot of emotion taking place around that decision. And then finally, it's disparate motivations and intentions. And what that really means is the reason that you're taking action or giving direction to people is inconsistent with what people think you're doing it for. If you're dealing with conflicts, whether they're happening with different people for different reasons, or it's just going on, you really need to know how to be able to deal with these so you can put most of them to bed and spend your time running your business. So here are some steps that you can take that'll make you better at dealing with workplace conflict. Number one is embrace it. Okay, if you're running an organization with people, conflict is just part of the package and you really can't get away from it. So the best thing to do is really to embrace it, to recognize that it's just a part of dealing with people and be willing to jump in when you need to. Number two is prevention. There are actually things that you can do in the workplace to keep conflict to a minimum. There are things like, if you have people with specific jobs, do they understand those jobs really well? Do they have job descriptions that tell them what lane of the highway they need to be playing in? Organizational charts help quite a bit because it gives people a real feeling as to what the hierarchy looks like and who they have to report to. Clear expectations, just in terms of how you work in the environment and with teams, with the other people that you're responsible for working with. Those clear expectations can help people determine what behaviors to use when they're on the job. And finally, general guidelines about what you consider to be appropriate behavior and inappropriate behavior can really serve to give people a framework with which to work. Number 3, this especially goes true for managers. Be aware. Be able to watch the landscape around you to be able to pick up signs that a conflict is brewing. Now, here's 3 areas where that's going to show up. 1, there's people in your organization that are probably really good at what they do, but they're just prone to conflict. They like drama, they like mixing it up, and so they're going to be at the root of these kind of conflict situations. You have to know who these folks are. Process friction can actually be another one. You might have a very specific process for how you run your business, how you provide service, how you get things going within your organization. But if there are certain hiccups in that process that don't seem to go well, the people on either side of those situations are going to be more prone to conflict. And then finally, expectation gaps. What you're expecting each person to do within their job as well as working with the team. If there are big gaps and people are kind of unsure about what to do, that could be another source of conflict. Here's where where the rubber meets the road, basically. When you're first being exposed to a conflict, either because it's something that you might have inadvertently caused or something you're being introduced to, maintain some self-control. The worst thing you can do is bring your own level of emotion into an already emotionally charged area and just kind of escalate things. So make sure that anger or happiness or anything like that that could control the flow of how you're trying to resolve that conflict is out of the picture. Number 5, act as a facilitator. At this point, you're not really looking to actually legislate a solution, because if you don't have buy-in from the people that are actually involved in the conflict, it's not going to stick. So what you really need to do is put on your facilitator hat and help people understand what they really want out of a resolution. Be willing to talk with them individually or in a group setting to help them figure out what's most important to them so they can have a meeting of the minds and develop a resolution on their own. Next, you want to set guidelines. Anytime you walk into a conflict, the emotions are charged, people are already kind of taking sides, they're not really willing to talk with each other in a very professional manner. You've got to be able to establish ground rules so that people are willing to sit down and articulate the problem and have a back and forth discussion that's professional and productive. When you're in the middle of helping to resolve and facilitate the resolution of a conflict, you've got to be a really good listener. Half the battle is just figuring out what people want versus what they're telling each other. And a lot of times when things get really charged, the things people say aren't real productive. So being a really good listener and pulling out the essentials of what people are trying to say so you can get everybody on the same page is a crucial attribute for most good managers to have. Lastly, establish agreement and accountability once a resolution is reached. If everybody agrees to the solution, but they're not willing to be held accountable for actually acting on it and making it work, then it's just going to fall apart. So people have to know that if they're going to be part of the solution, they have to be accountable for executing it and making sure that it works. If you follow those steps and if you practice getting involved and helping to resolve conflict, here's 4 things that are going to benefit your business. 1, your trust with your people is going to go way up. 2, as the manager or the authority figure in the business, you're going to get a lot more respect. That's going to lead to a better level of authority that people are willing to honor. And finally, it's going to give you the confidence to be able to deal with really harsh issues and see a positive outcome.